President Carter, I wanted to switch gears to talk about the raging controversy over your book, Palestine, Peace, Not Apartheid.
I didn't know it was still raging, but that's interesting.
Well, it raged for a while,
Yeah.
and now the book is coming out in paperback with
Yes.
a new afterword, and you dealt with that. You talked about it being perhaps the most controversial thing that you've done, maybe to your surprise. So start with the title. Talk about the message you're trying to put out with this book.
Well, the message is very clear. It deals with Palestine. You're not inside Israel itself, just the Palestinian occupied territories. And the second word is peace. I describe in this book the efforts for peace so far and my formula, which I think is very reasonable, for bringing peace to Israel and to Israel's neighbors. And I repeat that over and over with a strong condemnation of any kind of terrorism that afflicts innocent people by the actions of either the Palestinians or the Israelis. And the word apartheid is exactly accurate. You know, this is an area that's occupied by two powers. They're now completely separated. The Palestinians can't even ride on the same roads that the Israelis have created or built in Palestinian territory. The Israelis never see a Palestinian except their Israeli soldiers. The Palestinians never see an Israeli except at a distance, except the Israeli soldiers. So within Palestinian territory, they're absolutely and totally separated, much worse than they were in South Africa, by the way. And the other thing is, the other definition of apartheid is one side dominates the other, and the Israelis completely dominate the life of the Palestinian people.
Why don't Americans know what you have seen?
Americans don't want to know, and many Israelis don't want to know what is going on inside Palestine. It's a terrible human rights persecution that far transcends what any outsider would imagine. And there are powerful political forces in America that prevents any objective analysis of the problem in the Holy Land. I think it's accurate to say that not a single member of Congress with whom I'm familiar would possibly speak out and call for Israel to withdraw to their legal boundaries or to publicize the plight of the Palestinians, or even to call publicly and repeatedly for good faith peace talks. There hadn't been a day of peace talks now in more than 7 years. So this is a taboo subject, and I would say that if any member of Congress did speak out, as I've just described, they would probably not be back into Congress the next term.
Who are these forces that you're talking about?
Well, there's an inherent commitment in America, which I share as a Christian, of a deep commitment to make sure that Israel is safe and that Israel is free, and that they can seek for peace. So there's a strong inclination for all of us to support Israel's continued existence in peace. And that is added on to by the very effective work of the American-Israeli group called AIPAC, which is performing its completely legitimate task of convincing Americans to support the policies of the Israeli government. And AIPAC is not dedicated to peace. They're dedicated to inducing the maximum support in America, in the White House, in the Congress, and in the public media for whatever policies the Israeli government has at a particular time, and they're extremely effective.
Do you agree with Walt and Mearsheimer, their new book, The Israel Lobby, about the power of AIPAC determining U.S. foreign policy?
I have to say I haven't read the book. I've read stories about it. I don't really know about the details of it, but I do know that AIPAC is very powerful and completely legitimate. I'm not complaining because that's their purpose in life, and AIPAC, I think, was organized in the distant past, I think, when Eisenhower was president, and they've grown in influence, and in some ways they are to be admired.
Did they influence you as president?
Not really, because I was immune from those pressures. When I was elected president, you know, I came out of nowhere. Nobody thought I was going to win until the last minute, and so I wasn't obligated to them. And I worked assiduously almost every day of my term as president to bring peace to Israel, and also peace to Israel's neighbors. And we negotiated a peace treaty between Israel and Egypt, not a word of which has ever been violated. So I don't think there was any doubt that, that my commitment then and now was to see Israel have peace, living in harmony with its neighbors, and justice as well, and peace for Israel's neighbors.
President Carter, when did you come to understand, through your presidency and beyond, the situation of the Palestinians?
Well, the situation with the Palestinians when I was president was not all that bad. The first time I went to Israel, I was governor, and I went to the West Bank. There were only 1,500 settlers in all of the West Bank. And the general presumption, even by Israeli leaders with whom I met, was that Israel would withdraw from the Palestinian territories. It was a temporary thing. And when I negotiated an agreement with the Prime Minister of Israel, Menachem Begin, he agreed that the political forces and the military forces of Israelis would be withdrawn from Palestinian territory. That's all in the written agreement. But in the last 10 years, I would say the situation has deteriorated rapidly. Not many people are permitted to go and visit as we have done. For instance, members of B'Tselem, the outstanding human rights organization within Israel, those members are not permitted to go into areas of the West Bank. They have to observe from a distance what goes on, say, in Gaza now. But on 3 occasions, the Carter Center, led by me personally, have been invited by the Palestinians to monitor their election. In 1996, when Arafat was elected president and the first parliament, so-called, was elected. Again, after Arafat died, when Mahmoud Abbas was elected president, and then in 2006 in January, when the Hamas ran for parliamentary seats, and they were successful. So in performing the duty of monitoring election, we are obligated to go to every village and every town in the entire West Bank, and also throughout Gaza, to see what's going on. So we could see the terrible plight of the Palestinians, the fact that Israel has over 200 settlements on Palestinian territory, all fortified, that Israel has over 500 checkpoints in Palestine where the Palestinians can't move from one place to another, and where there's a wall being built completely surrounding Gaza, completely surrounding Bethlehem and other substantial sized cities, deeply intruding into Palestinian territory and encompassing more and more land for the Israelis to take away from Palestine. And the fact is that the West Bank is a tiny little place that was carved out for the Palestinians, just 22% of the total land. But the problem is that Israel wants to take that 22% and control it. And major highways are built from one Israeli settlement to another and into Jerusalem, from which many on many of those highways the Palestinians can't even ride, or sometimes can't even cross the highways. So this is what's happening inside Palestine, perpetrated by the Israelis, and this is a major obstacle to having what I want and what most Israelis want, by an overwhelming majority, and that is peace.
At this conference, you described the wall as worse than the Berlin Wall.
Oh, it's much worse. The Berlin Wall was built by the communists on the communist side of the border between East and West Germany, as you know. This wall is built on Palestinian land, and it's designed not for security. That's an ancillary benefit, but it goes deep within the West Bank just to carve out more and more land for the Israelis to occupy in Palestine.
What is the point of the wall?
The wall was built, was planned originally by Yitzhak Rabin when he was prime minister. He's the one that negotiated the Oslo Agreement, a peace agreement, to be built along the border the 1967 border between Israel and Palestine. And the International War Court and I and others approved completely. There's nothing wrong with that. That would have been like the Berlin Wall. But then Rabin was assassinated, and his successors, Netanyahu and Sharon and others, decided, let's move the wall from the Israeli border to intrude deeply within Palestine to carve out some of that precious land for the Israeli settlers to occupy.
What do you think of the Supreme Court, the Israeli Supreme Court ruling that the wall has to be rerouted when it comes to the city of Beilin?
Well, that's a tiny little place. I'm familiar with the geography. The Israeli court system is a very strange one. I describe it to some degree in my book. Almost all the decisions in the West Bank are made by military courts. It's not a civilian court. On occasion, rare occasions, the Palestinian people have been able to get an allegation before the Israeli Supreme Court that the wall is intruding excessively on their land. And it may be that 300 yards of the wall would have to be modified if it divided, say, a Palestinian family from their cemetery or from their gardens and so forth. And that does apply. And the wall is rerouted to accommodate that particular court case. But the Israeli courts also have a policy different from our courts, that nothing that the Supreme Court rules sets a precedent. If the Supreme Court rules that this wall is overly intrusive, it just applies to that little 300 yards of the wall and not to the entire concept of the wall. So it's almost impossible for a Palestinian community to hire an Israeli lawyer or a group of lawyers to take their case to the Supreme Court and have the ruling made. So that's a very rare occasion, but a very valuable occasion for that particular community.
President Carter, you and President Clinton differ strongly on these issues. Clinton has blamed the Palestinian leadership for rejecting what he called a generous peace offer from Israel and the U.S. beginning at Camp David in July 2000.
Yes.
Your view?
Well, I spell it out in the book. I mean, it's completely accurate. That was a very heroic effort by President Clinton, and I have expressed my admiration for him and my appreciation for his effort. But the proposal that he made was very ephemeral. There were never any maps drawn. There were never any particular delineation of a future border between Israel and the Palestinians. And the proposal that was made also permitted the Palestinians, the Israelis, to have still large portions of Palestine. And it did ostensibly restore about 90% of the little tiny West Bank to the Palestinians. But that does not include the access to the villages, and that does not include the barrier about 300 yards all the way around a village. And it didn't include the highways that went back and forth. So for all practical purposes, there was no way that any Palestinian leader could have adopted the proposal that was made.
It's interesting. We interviewed the former foreign minister of Israel, Shlomo Ben-Ami,
Yes.
who said if he were Palestinian, he would not have accepted it.
No, he wouldn't. I mean, that's true. And it's, if you look at the precise maps, there are no precise maps, by the way, that were proposed by President Clinton. A few maps were written after President Clinton went out of office, but none were presented to the Israelis or to the Palestinians. And I might say that the Prime Minister of Israel and his cabinet debated the Clinton proposals for a long time, and they finally said, we accept them in principle. But they had over 12 pages of objections or caveats. And Arafat also said, we accept the Clinton proposals in principle, but there were a lot of caveats as well. So there never was any precise delineation of land or exact description of what would happen with refugees or in definitive terms with Jerusalem.
Did you expect the firestorm in response to your book?
Well, in a way, yes. My mail was overwhelmingly supportive of the book, and it was fairly easy in the roughly 6,000 letters I got to see which ones were from American Jewish citizens. Some identified themselves as being Jewish, and a number of them dozens were rabbis. 4 said they identified themselves as Holocaust survivors, all of them in favor of the book. Over 70% were in favor of the book. But that's a quiet voice. And when I have met with some of them personally, here and in other states, including New York State and California, they have told me that it's almost impossible for them to speak out publicly in support of the book, although they express their support quietly, because it's interpreted as being critical of Israel itself, and it's just not an appropriate thing for them to do.
What do you want to see happen now in Israel and Palestine?
I would like to see good faith negotiations begun after 7 years of no talks. There's some basic principles that have been written that I describe in detail in the book that would delineate a proper border between Israel and the Palestinians, with some modifications of the 1967 borders that would permit half the Israeli settlers to stay in Palestine and swap an equivalent amount of land to the Palestinians just east of Gaza. That proposal also describes what should be done about refugees and what should be done about Jerusalem. It's called the Geneva Plan, and it was revealed in Geneva in November of 2003, I think, and it was distributed in detail to every mailbox, for instance, in Israel and Palestine, and overwhelmingly, both Palestinians and Israelis supported it by a wide margin. But it never has gotten off the ground because the Israeli leaders have not been willing to negotiate on that basis and have not been willing to negotiate on any basis.
Do you plan on continuing to speak out on this issue?
Yes, I do. I hope to go back to the Holy Land and to the Mideast maybe within the next few months on another trip. And I'd like to talk to some of the Arab leaders, say in Saudi Arabia and Jordan and Egypt. I'd like to talk to the Palestinians and talk to Israeli leaders and then to add my voice, which is a very small voice now. I don't have any authority to the effort to bring about at least good faith talks on substance, which, as I said, have been missing now for more than 7 years.